That seat belongs to people like me, not people like you. The words sliced through the first-class cabin like broken glass, sharp and deliberate. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The soft hum of pre-flight preparation suddenly felt deafening in the silence that followed. Victoria Mitchell stood in the narrow aisle of Skyline Airlines Flight 847. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed directly at Seat 1A. She was 38, blonde hair pulled back in a flawless chignon, wearing a cream-colored Chanel blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her posture screamed entitlement. Her expression radiated disgust. The man in Seat 1A didn't move. Cameron Brooks, 42 years old, sat back in the wide leather seat with his hands folded calmly in his lap. He wore a navy blazer over a simple white t-shirt, dark jeans, and worn leather loafers that had seen better days. His carry-on bag, scuffed at the edges from years of travel, was tucked neatly in the overhead compartment above him. Everything about him was understated, unremarkable, forgettable. Except for his eyes. They were steady alert measuring. And right now they were fixed on Victoria Mitchell with the kind of calm that comes before a storm. Before we dive deeper into this story that shocked an entire airplane and went viral across the internet, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that respect should be earned by character, not demanded by appearance, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next will remind you that sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the most power. It was Thursday morning, 8:45 a.m. at Los Angeles International Airport. The Boeing 737 sat at Gate 42, its engines silent, boarding nearly complete. The first-class cabin held 16 seats, and 15 of them were occupied by the usual mix of business travelers, frequent flyers, and people who had paid premium prices for premium treatment. Cameron had boarded early, settled into his assigned seat without fanfare, and pulled out his tablet to review some documents. He'd flown this route dozens of times, always preferring the window seat for the view of the country passing below. Today was supposed to be routine. A quick flight to New York, a board meeting, then home by evening. He hadn't counted on Victoria Mitchell. She had swept into first class like she owned the aircraft designer heels clicking against the floor, Louis Vuitton carry-on trailing behind her. Her eyes had scanned the cabin with the practiced efficiency of someone used to getting exactly what she wanted. When those eyes landed on Cameron in Seat 1A, they narrowed. "Excuse me," she had said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. "You're in my seat." Cameron had looked up from his tablet, polite but unmoved. "I don't think so. This is 1A. That's what my boarding pass says." Victoria's perfectly painted lips had pressed into a thin line. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her mobile boarding pass, then looked back at Cameron with growing irritation. "There's been a mistake," she said. "I always sit in 1A. I'm a Diamond Elite member. I've been flying this route for years." "I understand," Cameron replied quietly. "But today this is my seat." That's when Victoria's composure had started to crack. Her voice rose just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Look, I don't know how you got that ticket, but there's obviously been some kind of error. The system probably glitched. Maybe you were upgraded from coach, maybe someone made a mistake at the gate, but this is my seat." Cameron had closed his tablet and given Victoria his full attention. "Ma'am, I paid for this seat. It's assigned to me. If there's a problem with your reservation, I suggest you speak with the flight attendants." Victoria's cheeks had flushed pink. "Don't ma'am me, and don't act like you don't know exactly what's happening here." It was then, in that moment of rising tension, that Victoria Mitchell had pointed her finger at Cameron Brooks and delivered the words that would change everything. "That seat belongs to people like me, not people like you." The silence that followed was absolute. A businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper and stared. An elderly couple in row 2 exchanged horrified glances. A young woman near the window pulled out her phone and started recording. Cameron looked at Victoria for a long moment. His expression didn't change. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and controlled. And what kind of person would that be? Victoria's eyes flashed. She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to catch herself. But the damage was done. The implication hung in the air like smoke, visible to everyone and impossible to ignore. In the back of first class, a college student named Danny Reeves whispered to his phone, "You guys are not going to believe what I'm witnessing right now. This is going viral." He adjusted his camera angle and continued live streaming, his viewer count already climbing past 50. Across the aisle, a middle-aged business traveler named Paul Santos started recording discreetly, his phone angled just enough to capture the confrontation without being obvious. He'd seen situations like this before, but never quite this blatant. Victoria straightened her blazer and took a half step closer to Cameron. "Look," she said, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a reasonable tone. "I'm sure you're a nice person, but there's been a clear mistake here. I have a meeting in New York. I need this specific seat. I'm sure you can understand." Cameron unbuckled his seatbelt and stood slowly. At his full height, he filled the narrow space between the seats. Victoria instinctively stepped back. "I understand perfectly," Cameron said. "The question is, do you—" A flight attendant appeared at Cameron's shoulder, drawn by the raised voices and the growing attention from other passengers. Jessica Martinez was 29 years old, with dark hair pulled back in the regulation bun and the kind of smile that had been trained to smooth over turbulence before it could turn into something worse. "Is everything all right here?" Jessica asked, her voice carrying the practiced cheerfulness of someone who dealt with difficult passengers every day. Victoria turned to her, immediately relief flooding her features. Finally, someone with authority who could fix this obvious mistake. "Yes, there's a problem," Victoria said, gesturing toward Cameron. "This man is sitting in my seat. I'm Victoria Mitchell, Diamond Elite member, frequent flyer, number 4428792. I always sit in 1A on this route. Always." Jessica glanced at her tablet, then looked between Victoria and Cameron. "Ma'am, according to our manifest seat, 1A is assigned to Mr. Cameron Brooks. Your reservation shows seat 3C. Victoria's mouth fell open. "That's impossible. I specifically requested 1A. I always get 1A. Check your system again." Jessica tapped her tablet, frowning slightly. "Ma'am, I'm showing that seat 1A has been reserved by Mr. Brooks for over 3 weeks. Seat 3C is available, and it's actually a premium seat with extra legroom." "I don't want 3C, Victoria snapped. "I want 1A, and I want him moved." The cabin had gone quiet except for the soft sound of phone cameras recording. Danny Reeves leaned closer to his phone and whispered, "This lady is losing her mind over a seat, guys. The flight attendant just confirmed the black man is in the right seat, but she's still demanding he be moved." Paul Santos continued recording from across the aisle, shaking his head in disbelief. Behind him, an older woman named Margaret Chen whispered to her husband, "This is disgusting. That poor man hasn't done anything wrong." Jessica looked uncomfortable now, caught between policy and a passenger who clearly wasn't going to back down easily. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but seat assignments are final once boarding begins. Mr. Brooks has done nothing wrong." Victoria's voice rose another notch. "Look at him," she said loud enough for half the cabin to hear clearly. "Does he look like he belongs in first class? Does he look like he can actually afford to be here?" A gasp rippled through the cabin. Someone near the back said, "Oh my God." Another passenger pulled out their phone and started filming. Cameron's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "I paid for this seat like everyone else, ma'am. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you take it up with the airline, not with me." Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Paid for it." "Really? With what, your welfare check?" The insult landed like a slap. Several passengers inhaled sharply. Jessica's eyes widened in shock. "Ma'am, that kind of language is not appropriate." "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Victoria continued, emboldened by her own anger. "People like him don't just magically end up in first class. Something's not right here. Maybe the ticket's stolen. Maybe it's fraudulent. Maybe he's lying about who he is." Cameron looked around the cabin, taking in the faces staring back at him. Some showed sympathy, others curiosity. A few displayed the kind of uncomfortable embarrassment that came from witnessing something they wished they hadn't seen. "People like me," Cameron repeated quietly. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Victoria's cheeks reddened. "Don't twist my words. You know exactly what I mean." "No," Cameron said, his voice gaining strength. "I don't." "Why don't you explain it to all of us?" Danny's livestream viewer count had climbed past 500. Comments were flooding in faster than he could read them. "Holy shit, this is insane," he whispered to his phone. "She just basically accused this guy of welfare fraud and ticket theft because he's black. This is 2024, people. This is actually happening." Paul Santos felt his stomach churn with recognition. He'd grown up in East LA, had seen this kind of casual racism his whole life. The difference was now it was being broadcast live to the internet. Margaret Chen leaned forward in her seat. "Young man," she called to Cameron, "you don't have to listen to this. She's being completely inappropriate." Victoria whirled around. "Mind your own business, lady." "This is everyone's business now," Margaret replied firmly. "You're making a scene in front of all of us." Jessica tried to regain control of the situation. "Ma'am, please keep your voice down. If you can't find a way to resolve this civilly, I'll need to call my supervisor." "Good," Victoria snapped. "Call whoever you need to call. But I'm not moving until he does." Cameron sat back down, buckled his seatbelt, and picked up his tablet. "I'm not going anywhere," he said calmly. "This is my seat. I'll be staying in it." Victoria stared at him, her face cycling through several shades of red. Around them, the cabin buzzed with whispered conversations and the soft sound of phones capturing every moment. The college student in the back row increased his phone's volume and addressed his growing audience. "Guys, we're at almost 2,000 viewers now and climbing. This is absolutely unreal. The entitlement is off the charts. She literally just accused this man of theft and fraud because she doesn't think he belongs in first class." A businessman near the front shook his head and muttered to his seatmate, "20 years I've been flying, never seen anything this blatant." His companion nodded. "The audacity is stunning. That man's handling it better than I would." Jessica looked helplessly between Cameron and Victoria, then back at her tablet. "Ma'am, I really need you to take your assigned seat so we can prepare for departure." Victoria crossed her arms. "I already told you. I'm not moving until he does." Cameron looked up from his tablet. "Jessica, is it?" The flight attendant nodded. "You might want to call your supervisor now. This situation is about to require some higher-level decision-making." Victoria Mitchell had clearly reached her breaking point. Her perfectly composed facade was cracking, revealing something ugly underneath. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her wallet leather so soft it practically whispered money. "Fine," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "If this is about money, let's make it about money." She pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills and held them up so Cameron could see them clearly. Around the cabin, passengers craned their necks to get a better view. Danny Reeves adjusted his phone angle to capture the money, whispering to his live stream audience. "You guys are seeing this, right? She's literally trying to bribe him now." "Here," Victoria said, waving the bills in front of Cameron's face. $500. Cash." Take it and go sit in coach where you belong. Everyone wins." The cabin went dead silent. Even the background hum of the air conditioning seemed to pause in shock. Cameron stared at the money for a long moment. His expression was unreadable, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that people had to lean forward to hear him. "Put your money away." Victoria laughed, shrill and desperate. "Oh, come on. Don't act offended. $500 for a 2-hour flight. That's more than you probably make in a week." "Ma'am," Cameron said, his voice dropping even lower, "I'm going to ask you one more time to put your money away and take your assigned seat." Or what Victoria challenged. "You'll call security. You'll complain. Do you have any idea who I am? Who my husband is?" Paul Santos, still recording from across the aisle, found himself leaning forward. He'd seen workplace discrimination, casual racism, microaggressions that flew under the radar. But this was different. This was overt, unapologetic, performed in front of dozens of witnesses like Victoria thought her behavior was not just acceptable, but justified. Margaret Chen's husband, Henry, had remained quiet up to this point, but now he spoke up. "Lady, you need to stop. You're embarrassing yourself." Victoria rounded on him. "Excuse me, you heard me?" Henry said, his voice carrying the authority of his 73 years. "I fought in Vietnam so people could be treated with dignity regardless of their color. What you're doing is shameful." "Don't lecture me, old man." Victoria spat. "This isn't about race. This is about someone trying to take something that doesn't belong to them." "The flight attendant already confirmed the seat belongs to him," Margaret interjected. "Multiple times." Victoria's face was bright red now, whether from anger or embarrassment, it was impossible to tell. "You people don't understand. I have standards. I have expectations. I pay for first-class service, and that means sitting next to first-class people." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Danny's live stream had grown to over 5,000 viewers, with comments flooding in from around the world. People were sharing the stream, creating clips, posting reactions in real time. Cameron set his tablet aside and stood up again, this time moving into the aisle so he was facing Victoria directly. His voice, when he spoke, carried a weight that made everyone in the cabin pay attention. "First-class people," he repeated. "And what makes someone a first-class person, Victoria?" She blinked, startled by his use of her name. What? You said you pay to sit next to first-class people. I'm curious about your criteria. Is it money? Because you just offered me $500, which suggests you think I need it. Is it education? Because you don't know anything about my background. Is it occupation? Because you haven't asked what I do for a living. Victoria's mouth opened and closed. She looked around the cabin as if searching for support, but found only stares ranging from disgusted to fascinated. Cameron continued, his voice gaining momentum. "So what is it, Victoria? What makes you more deserving of this seat than me? What makes you first class and me? What did you call it? Someone who belongs in Coach I. That's not..." Victoria stammered. "Because from where I'm standing," Cameron said, "the only difference between us is that I'm treating everyone on this plane with respect and you're not." A smattering of applause started from the back of the cabin. It spread forward, growing louder until nearly every passenger was clapping. Victoria looked around in shock, as if she couldn't understand why the crowd had turned against her. Jessica Martinez had been watching the exchange with growing alarm. She'd been a flight attendant for 7 years, had dealt with drunk passengers, medical emergencies, even a few minor altercations. But she'd never seen anything quite like this. A passenger so blatantly discriminatory in front of so many witnesses, with everything being recorded and streamed live. "Ma'am," Jessica said, stepping closer to Victoria, "I really need you to take your assigned seat now. We're already delayed and the captain will need to be informed if this continues." Victoria whirled around to face her. "The captain." "Good," Call him. Because when he gets here, he's going to see that your airline has a serious problem with passenger fraud, and he's going to fix it." Cameron smiled, then just a slight upturn of his lips that somehow managed to be both amused and dangerous. "You know what, Victoria, I think calling the captain is an excellent idea." He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out his phone. Victoria watched suspiciously as he scrolled through his contacts and selected a number. "Jessica," Cameron said, not looking away from Victoria. "You might want to listen to this call." The phone in Cameron's hand rang twice before a voice answered, crisp and professional even through the small speaker. "Skyline Operations. This is Director Walsh." Victoria frowned, confused by the immediate response and the formal tone. She looked at Jessica, who was staring at Cameron with growing puzzlement. "Good morning, Director Walsh," Cameron said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "I'm calling from Flight 847 currently at the gate in Los Angeles. We have a passenger situation that might require your attention." "Of course, sir." "What's the nature of the problem?" Victoria's eyebrows shot up. The operations director was treating this complaint with unusual seriousness. She stepped closer, trying to hear both sides of the conversation. "A passenger is claiming that my seat assignment is fraudulent," Cameron continued. "She's demanding that I be removed from first class and has made some rather concerning statements about who does and doesn't belong in premium seating." I see Director Walsh replied, and even through the phone, his tone had shifted to something more serious. "Would you like me to speak with the flight crew?" Jessica looked back and forth between Cameron and the phone, clearly confused about why a passenger complaint was getting this level of attention from operations. Victoria had heard enough. She reached for Cameron's phone. "Let me talk to him. I can explain what's really happening here." Cameron moved the phone away from her reach, but he didn't hang up. "Director Walsh, the passenger, would like to speak with you." "Put her on speaker," came the reply. Cameron tapped the screen, and suddenly the conversation was audible to everyone in the immediate area. Danny adjusted his phone to capture the audio while passengers leaned forward to listen. "This is Victoria Mitchell," she said, speaking toward Cameron's phone with renewed confidence. "Frequent flyer number 4428792, Diamond Elite status. I've been flying this route for over 5 years, and I always sit in 1A. Always. There's clearly been some kind of mistake with your computer system, and I need this man moved to his proper seat." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Director Walsh spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm looking at the reservation system now. Seat 1A on Flight 847 has been assigned to Mr. Brooks for 3 weeks. Your reservation shows Seat 3C. Victoria's face flushed. "That's impossible. I would never book 3C. Check your records. Check my history. I always get 1A. "Ma'am," Director Walsh replied. "I'm looking at your booking history. While you have requested 1A on multiple occasions, it hasn't always been available. On your last 4 flights with us, you've sat in 2A, 3C, 1C, and 4A respectively." The correction hit Victoria like a slap. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, clearly flustered. Jessica Martinez had been listening to the exchange with growing confusion. In her 7 years with Skyline, she'd never seen a passenger get this level of attention from operations for a seating dispute. Usually, these calls went to customer service, not directly to a director. Sir Jessica said, addressing Cameron, "I'm not sure I understand why operations is handling this directly. Usually, seating issues are resolved through customer service or..." Cameron looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. "Jessica, why don't we get your supervisor involved? This situation is escalating beyond what you should have to handle alone." Before Jessica could respond, Victoria jumped back into the conversation. "Exactly. Get someone with real authority over here, someone who can see that this whole situation is ridiculous." "I'll call the purser," Jessica said, reaching for her communication device. Within minutes, Amanda Rodriguez appeared in the first-class cabin. At 45, Amanda had been with Skyline Airlines for 18 years, working her way up from flight attendant to purser through a combination of professionalism, competence, and an unflappable demeanor that served her well in crisis situations. She took one look at the scene, a well-dressed woman standing in the aisle arguing with a seated passenger while several other travelers recorded the interaction, and immediately understood that this was not going to be a routine resolution. "Good morning, Amanda," said her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from years of managing difficult situations at 30,000 feet. "I'm Amanda Rodriguez, the purser for this flight. Jessica, can you brief me on what's happening here?" Before Jessica could respond, Victoria stepped forward. Finally, someone with real authority. "I'm Victoria Mitchell Diamond, elite member. This man," she pointed at Cameron, "is sitting in my seat. I've been trying to get this resolved for 20 minutes, and your staff keeps insisting that he belongs there." Amanda looked at her tablet, then at Cameron, then back at Victoria. "Miss Mitchell, I'm showing seat 1A, assigned to Mr. Brooks. Your seat is 3C. It's also a first-class seat with excellent amenities." Victoria's voice rose in frustration. "I don't want 3C. I want 1A. I always sit in 1A. This is clearly some kind of system error, and I need you to fix it." Amanda glanced at Cameron, who was still holding his phone with Director Walsh on the line. Something about the calm way he was handling the situation struck her as unusual. Sir Amanda said to Cameron, "Are you comfortable with your seating arrangement?" "Perfectly comfortable," Cameron replied. "This is my assigned seat. I paid for it, and I intend to remain in it." Victoria threw her hands up in exasperation. "This is insane. You people are treating him like royalty while a paying customer, a loyal customer, is being ignored." "Ma'am," Amanda said carefully, "you are also a paying customer, and we value your business. But seat assignments are final once boarding begins unless there's a safety issue or a passenger volunteers to move." "Then, make him volunteer," Victoria demanded. "Offer him something. I already tried to pay him to move, but he refused." Amanda's eyebrows rose. "You offered to pay another passenger to give up their seat." The question hung in the air. Danny's livestream viewer count had climbed past 8,000 with people sharing clips and commenting from around the world. The hashtag Victoria Entitled was starting to trend on social media. Victoria seemed to realize she had said something problematic. "It was just... I was trying to resolve this reasonably. I offered him compensation for the inconvenience." "How much?" asked Paul Santos from across the aisle, his phone still recording. Victoria shot him a withering look. "That's none of your business." $500? Cameron said quietly. "She offered me $500 to move to coach because people like me belong there, not in first class with people like her." A murmur of shock rippled through the cabin. Amanda's face went pale. These kinds of incidents were exactly what airlines feared most. Discrimination complaints with multiple witnesses and video evidence. "Is that accurate, Miss Mitchell?" Amanda asked. Victoria's face was bright red now. "I didn't say anything about race. This isn't about race. This is about someone taking a seat that doesn't belong to them." "But the seat does belong to him," Margaret Chen called out from row 2. "Your own people have confirmed it multiple times, and you offered him money to move to the back of the plane," added Henry Chen. "How is that not exactly what it looks like?" Victoria looked around the cabin wildly, as if searching for support that clearly wasn't coming. "You're all twisting my words. I was trying to be reasonable. I was trying to solve a problem." Cameron stood up again, and this time there was something different in his posture. The calm was still there, but underneath it was a steel that hadn't been visible before. "Victoria," he said, "you've accused me of fraud, theft, and welfare dependency. You've offered me money to move to the back of the plane. You've questioned whether I belong in first class based on nothing more than your assumptions about what I look like. And now you're claiming that you were being reasonable." Director Walsh's voice came through the phone speaker, reminding everyone that the conversation was still being monitored from operations. "Sir," he said, "would you like me to contact airport security?" Before Cameron could respond, Victoria grabbed the phone from his hand. "Yes," she said into the device. "Call security. Call whoever you need to call, because I am not moving from this spot until this man is removed from my seat." The situation had officially escalated beyond Amanda Rodriguez's authority as purser. She'd handled difficult passengers before drunk travelers, medical emergencies, even a few minor disturbances. But a passenger grabbing another passenger's phone and demanding security intervention while multiple people live-streamed the confrontation, that required the captain. "I'm calling the captain," Amanda announced to the cabin. She pressed her communication device and spoke quietly into it. "Captain Torres to first class, please. Priority situation." Victoria still held Cameron's phone, speaking rapidly into it. "This is Victoria Mitchell. I'm a Diamond Elite member and I'm being harassed by another passenger. I need security to remove him immediately." Director Walsh's voice came through the speaker, professional but strained. "Ma'am, I need you to return the phone to its owner and step back. You're currently creating a disturbance that could result in your removal from the aircraft." "My removal?" Victoria's voice pitched higher. "I'm not the problem here. I'm the victim. This man stole my seat and everyone's protecting him instead of helping a loyal customer." Cameron extended his hand calmly. "Victoria, please give me back my phone." "No," she said, clutching it tighter. "Not until someone with real authority fixes this mess." Heavy footsteps echoed from the front of the aircraft and Captain Michael Torres appeared in the first-class cabin. At 52, he had the weathered look of a pilot with over 25 years of experience flying everything from regional jets to wide-body internationals. His presence immediately commanded attention. "What's the situation, Torres?" asked Amanda, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate answers. Before Amanda could respond, Victoria thrust Cameron's phone toward the captain. "Captain, thank God. I'm Victoria Mitchell, Diamond Elite member. This man is sitting in my seat and refusing to move. Your crew has been completely unhelpful." Torres looked at the phone in Victoria's hand, then at Cameron, then back at Victoria. "Ma'am, why do you have another passenger's phone? He was using it to call people and cause problems. I took it to get this resolved properly." Cameron's voice was steady but firm. "Captain, I'd like my phone back, please." Torres nodded to Victoria. "Ma'am, return the passenger's property immediately." Victoria hesitated, then reluctantly handed the phone back to Cameron. "This is ridiculous. I'm being treated like a criminal when I'm just trying to get what I paid for." Torres looked at Amanda. "Brief me." Amanda consulted her tablet. "Sir Ms. Mitchell claims seat 1A, but it's assigned to Mr. Brooks. She's refused to take her actual seat 3C and has been disrupting other passengers for approximately 30 minutes. Torres turned to Cameron. "Sir, can you show me your boarding pass?" Cameron pulled out his phone and displayed his mobile boarding pass. Torres examined it, then looked at his tablet to cross-reference the information. "This shows seat 1A assigned to Cameron Brooks." Torres confirmed. "Ms. Mitchell, your boarding pass, please." Victoria fumbled with her phone, her hands shaking slightly as she brought up her boarding pass. Torres examined it and frowned. "This shows seat 3C, he said. "That's wrong," Victoria insisted. "I always sit in 1A. Always. There must be some kind of computer error." Torres looked around the cabin, taking in the number of passengers with phones out, clearly recording the interaction. His expression suggested he was rapidly calculating the potential fallout from this situation. "Sir," he said to Cameron, "would you be willing to move to another seat to resolve this issue?" The question surprised everyone. Danny leaned closer to his phone and whispered, "Did the captain just ask the guy who's in the right seat to move? This is crazy." Cameron looked at Captain Torres for a long moment before responding. Captain, are you asking me to give up my assigned seat to accommodate someone who's been verbally abusing me for the past half hour? I'm trying to find a resolution that gets this flight in the air, Torres replied. And the resolution is to reward her behavior. Cameron's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now that made everyone pay attention. Captain, I'd like you to think very carefully about what kind of precedent that sets. Torres paused. There was something in Cameron's tone, something that suggested this wasn't just an ordinary passenger complaint. The captain had been flying for over 2 decades, had dealt with thousands of difficult passengers, and had developed an instinct for when situations were more complicated than they appeared. Sir Torres said, "May I ask what you do for a living?" Victoria jumped in before Cameron could answer. "What does that matter? I'm a consultant. I make good money. I pay for first-class seats. What more do you need to know?" Cameron smiled slightly. "Captain Torres, what would you say if I told you I had a meeting in New York this afternoon that could affect the future of this airline?" The captain's eyes narrowed. "I'd say that sounds like an exaggeration." "Would you?" Cameron pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "What if I told you that meeting was with the board of directors?" Torres studied Cameron's face, looking for signs of bluffing or delusion. What he saw instead was complete calm, the kind of certainty that came from absolute confidence. "Sir, are you claiming to work for Skyline Airlines?" Cameron's smile widened just slightly. "Captain, why don't you call operations and ask Director Walsh who exactly is on board your aircraft today?" Victoria laughed, shrill and disbelieving. "Oh, this is rich. Now he's claiming he works for the airline. What's next? Are you going to say you're the CEO?" The cabin went quiet. Even Danny's whispered commentary to his live stream stopped. Something had shifted in the atmosphere, a tension that suggested everyone was standing on the edge of a revelation none of them had seen coming. Captain Torres pressed his communication device. "Operations. This is Captain Torres on Flight 847. I need you to verify the identity of passenger Cameron Brooks in Seat 1A. The response came back within seconds, loud enough for several passengers to hear Captain Mr. Brooks is... Please hold." The pause stretched longer than anyone expected. Victoria looked around the cabin, her confidence wavering for the first time since the confrontation began. Operations to Captain Torres came the voice more formal now. "Sir, Mr. Brooks is listed as... He's a VIP passenger." "Very VIP, sir." Torres stared at Cameron. VIP. Cameron reached into his blazer and pulled out a slim black wallet. From it, he extracted a card that looked different from a normal ID, thicker with a subtle metallic sheen that caught the cabin lights. Captain Cameron said quietly, "I think we need to have a private conversation." Captain Torres looked at the card in Cameron's hand and his expression changed immediately. Whatever he saw there drained the color from his face and straightened his posture in a way that suggested recognition of genuine authority. "Mr. Brooks Torres," said his voice dropping to a more respectful tone. "Perhaps we should step into the galley area for a moment." "No," Cameron said firmly. "I think this conversation should happen right here in front of everyone who's witnessed what's taken place." Victoria sensed the shift in the captain's demeanor and didn't like it one bit. "What's going on? What's on that card?" "This is all just some elaborate show to avoid admitting he's in the wrong seat." Cameron looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of passengers who were recording every moment, posting clips to social media in real time, creating a permanent record of everything that had happened. "Director Walsh," he said into his phone, which was still connected to operations. "Are you still there?" "Yes, sir. I'm here. I think it's time to clarify my relationship with Skyline Airlines for everyone who's been following this situation." Victoria scoffed. "Relationship? You're a passenger. That's your relationship." Cameron looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Victoria, you've spent the last 40 minutes telling me I don't belong in first class, That people like me don't deserve to sit next to people like you, that I must have stolen or fraudulently obtained my ticket. You've offered me money to move to the back of the plane and questioned everything from my income to my character based solely on your assumptions about what you see when you look at me. I never said anything about race. Victoria protested, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. You didn't have to, Cameron replied. Your implications were clear to everyone in this cabin. Danny's live stream had grown to over 12,000 viewers. Comments were flooding in from around the world, with people sharing the stream and creating reaction videos in real time. The hashtag Victoria Entitled was trending across multiple platforms. Director Walsh Cameron continued. Please inform Captain Torres and everyone else who can hear this conversation about my position with Skyline Airlines. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Director Walsh spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin. Cameron Brooks is the chairman and chief executive officer of Skyline Airlines. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's mouth fell open. Captain Torres went rigid. Jessica Martinez took a step backward, her hand flying to her mouth. Amanda Rodriguez stared at Cameron as if seeing him for the first time. Around the cabin, passengers began reacting in real time. Someone gasped. Another person said, "Holy shit," under their breath. Phones were raised higher to capture better video of the moment. Danny leaned into his live stream and whispered, "You guys, did you hear that? This man, the one she's been harassing and trying to bribe, he's the CEO of the airline. The actual CEO." Paul Santos, still recording from across the aisle, found himself shaking his head in disbelief. In all his years of business travel, he'd never witnessed anything quite like this reversal. Victoria staggered backward, her legs seeming to give out slightly. She grabbed the back of a seat to steady herself. That's not possible. You're lying. That card is fake." Cameron looked at Captain Torres. "Captain, would you like to verify my credentials?" Torres nodded mutely and took the card Cameron offered. He examined it closely, then looked up with an expression of complete shock and growing dread. "This is legitimate," Torres said quietly. The confirmation hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a pale, sickly white. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, this can't be happening." Cameron stood up, and this time when he moved into the aisle, there was nothing casual about his posture. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, someone whose decisions affected thousands of people and millions of dollars. "Victoria," he said, his voice carrying easily through the cabin. "You asked me what makes someone first class. You questioned whether I belong in this seat, whether I could afford it, whether my ticket was legitimate. You offered me money to move to coach because you assumed I was someone who could be bought." Victoria tried to speak, but no words came out. "Let me answer your questions," Cameron continued. "I don't just belong in this seat. I own it. I don't just belong in first class. I own the entire aircraft. I didn't steal a ticket or commit fraud. I own the airline." The cabin erupted in whispers and gasps. Several passengers applauded while others simply stared in amazement at the complete reversal of fortune they were witnessing. But more importantly, Cameron said, his voice rising slightly, none of that should matter. Every passenger on this aircraft deserves to be treated with respect regardless of what they look like, regardless of how much money you think they have, regardless of whether they meet your personal criteria for who belongs where. Victoria found her voice at last, though it came out as a croak. I didn't know." "You didn't know what Cameron asked. You didn't know I was the CEO." so that makes your behavior acceptable. You thought it was okay to discriminate against someone you perceived as powerless. But now that you know I have power, suddenly you're concerned. Amanda Rodriguez had been listening to the exchange, with growing horror not just at Victoria's behavior, but at the implications for the airline. Discrimination incidents with this level of documentation and social media coverage could result in federal investigations, boycotts, and massive public relations disasters. "Mr. Brooks," she said carefully on behalf of Skyline Airlines, "I want to apologize for what you've experienced today." Cameron looked at her with something that might have been disappointment. "Amanda, you have nothing to apologize for. You and Jessica handled this situation professionally. But I want you to think about something. If I weren't the CEO, if I were just an ordinary passenger, would an apology be enough? Would Victoria's behavior be any less wrong?" The question hung in the air unanswered but understood. Captain Torres cleared his throat. "Sir, what would you like me to do about this situation?" Before Cameron could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the aircraft entrance. A man's voice could be heard arguing with gate agents, growing louder and more aggressive as it approached the first-class cabin. "Where is my wife?" the voice shouted. "I want to know what the hell is going on here." Victoria's face went from white to gray. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Robert." Robert Mitchell stormed into the first-class cabin like a man preparing for war. He was 45 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive charcoal gray suit that screamed corporate executive. His Rolex caught the cabin lights as he gestured aggressively, and his face was flushed red with anger and adrenaline. "Victoria," he called out, spotting his wife standing in the aisle looking pale and shaken. "What's happening? Why aren't we in the air? I got your text saying someone was harassing you." He stopped when he saw Cameron standing calmly in the center of the confrontation, and his expression immediately hardened. Robert Mitchell was a man accustomed to getting his way through a combination of money connections and sheer intimidation. He took one look at the scene and made the same assumptions his wife had made 40 minutes earlier. "You," Robert said, pointing directly at Cameron. "You need to get off this plane. Now!" Captain Torres stepped forward. "Sir, you can't board the aircraft without going through security screening." "How did you get past the gate agents?" Robert flashed his ID badge. "Robert Mitchell, Vice President of Operations at Aero Supply Corporation. We provide jet fuel to half the airports on the West Coast, including this one. Your people let me through when I explained the situation." He turned back to Cameron, his voice rising loud enough for passengers throughout the cabin to hear clearly. "My wife texted me 20 minutes ago saying some thug was trying to steal her seat and threatening her. So here I am to straighten this out." Danny's live stream viewer count had exploded past 15,000. He whispered to his phone. "Guys, the husband just showed up and called the CEO a thug. This cannot get any worse for these people." Paul Santos continued recording, shaking his head at the incredible lack of awareness being displayed. Margaret and Henry Chen exchanged looks of horrified fascination, while other passengers pulled out their phones to capture this escalation. Cameron looked at Robert with the same calm assessment he'd shown Victoria. "Mr. Mitchell, I presume?" "That's right," Robert said, puffing up his chest. "And you're going to explain to me why you've been harassing my wife." "Actually," Cameron said quietly, "I think your wife should explain to you what's been happening here." Robert looked at Victoria, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Her earlier bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. "Victoria," Robert demanded, "tell me what this man did to you." Victoria's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. The seat. She's been claiming that my seat belongs to her," Cameron explained calmly. "When the flight crew confirmed that I was in the correct seat, she escalated to verbal abuse, discriminatory comments, and attempting to bribe me to move to coach. Robert's face darkened. That's bullshit. My wife doesn't need to bribe anyone. She's got more class in her little finger than most people have in their entire body. Mr. Mitchell. Captain Torres interjected. Perhaps you should hear the full story before I don't need to hear anything from you, Robert snapped. I know what happened. Some guy decides he wants to upgrade himself, probably got hold of someone else's boarding pass. And when my wife tries to reclaim her legitimate seat, he starts playing victim. The entire cabin was watching now, even passengers from business class and premium economy who had heard the commotion and craned their necks to see what was happening. The situation had become a public spectacle that was being broadcast live to thousands of viewers worldwide. Cameron reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Mr. Mitchell, since you mentioned Aero Supply Corporation, I think you should be part of an important conversation. I don't want to be part of any conversation with you, Robert said dismissively. I want you off this plane. Actually, Cameron said, selecting a contact from his phone. I think you'll want to hear this. He dialed and the phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Cameron put the call on speaker so everyone could hear. Brooks, is that you? The voice said warmly. I thought you were flying to New York this morning. I am Frank. Actually, I'm still on the plane. We've had a slight delay. Robert's face went pale. He recognized the voice immediately. Frank Sullivan, his CEO at Aero Supply Corporation. Cameron Frank continued what kind of delay. Do you need me to send the corporate jet? No, nothing like that. I'm here with one of your employees, actually. Robert Mitchell, Vice President of Operations. He just boarded the aircraft to resolve what he called a harassment situation. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Frank spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Robert boarded your aircraft without authorization to confront you. Victoria made a small strangled sound. Robert looked like he might be sick. Frank, Robert said quickly, stepping closer to the phone. I can explain. My wife was being harassed by another passenger, and I came to help resolve the situation. Robert Frank's voice came through the speaker, cold and controlled. Are you telling me that you confronted Cameron Brooks, the CEO of Skyline Airlines, our biggest client, because you thought he was harassing Victoria? The revelation hit the cabin like a thunderbolt. Passengers who had been merely interested spectators suddenly realized they were witnessing something much bigger than a seating dispute. This was a corporate disaster unfolding in real time. Danny nearly dropped his phone in shock. Holy shit, guys, he whispered to his live-stream audience, which had grown to over 20,000 viewers. The husband works for a company that does business with the airline. He just confronted his own company's biggest client. This is insane. Robert's face had gone from red to white to green in the span of 30 seconds. Frank, I didn't know. Victoria didn't tell me. What exactly did Victoria tell you? Frank's voice came through the speaker with surgical precision. Robert looked at his wife, who was now leaning against a seat back for support. She said someone was trying to steal her seat and threatening her. And based on that information, Frank continued, you decided to board an aircraft without proper authorization and confront another passenger. Cameron watched the exchange with the calm attention of someone observing a chess match where the outcome was already determined. Around the cabin, passengers recorded every word, creating a permanent record of the corporate implosion happening in real time. Frank Robert said desperately, you have to understand. I was protecting my wife. Any husband would do the same thing. Any husband would get the facts first, Frank replied. Any responsible executive would verify the situation before taking action that could jeopardize a multi-million-dollar business relationship. Captain Torres had been following the conversation with growing dread. As the implications became clear, he realized that this incident could have consequences far beyond a single flight delay. "Mr. Sullivan," Torres said, addressing the phone, "this is Captain Torres. I want to assure you that Skyline Airlines will conduct a full investigation of this incident." Captain Torres, Frank replied, "I appreciate that, but right now my concern is limiting the damage that my employee may have caused." "Cameron, are you still there?" "I'm here, Frank. I want you to know that Robert Mitchell no longer speaks for Aero Supply Corporation in any capacity. His employment is terminated effective immediately." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face cycling through disbelief, shock, and dawning horror. "Frank, you can't be serious," Robert said. 20 years with the company, 20 years of loyal service. You're going to throw that away over a misunderstanding?" Robert Frank's voice was final. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a catastrophic failure of judgment that has put our company's most important relationship at risk. Security will escort you from any Aero Supply facilities if you attempt to enter. Your corporate cards are already being canceled. HR will contact you about final paperwork." Victoria let out a sob and sank into the nearest seat. Robert looked around the cabin as if searching for someone who would tell him this was all a mistake, that he could somehow undo what had just happened. Frank Cameron said into the phone, "I appreciate your quick response, but I want you to know that Aero Supply's business relationship with Skyline isn't in jeopardy because of this incident. Robert's actions reflect on him, not on your company. Thank you, Cameron. That's more gracious than we deserve. But Robert's termination stands. What he did today is completely unacceptable." The call ended, leaving the cabin in stunned silence. Robert stood frozen in the aisle, his corporate executive persona completely shattered. Victoria sat slumped in the seat, tears streaming down her face, finally understanding the magnitude of what her behavior had cost them. Amanda Rodriguez stepped forward, her training kicking in as she tried to regain some control over the situation. "Mr. Brooks," she said carefully, "what would you like us to do about these passengers?" Cameron looked at Victoria, who was crying openly now, and at Robert, who looked like a man who had just watched his entire life collapse in the span of 5 minutes. "I want them off my aircraft," Cameron said simply. "Immediately." Captain Torres nodded to Amanda, who signaled toward the front of the plane. Within minutes, airport security appeared at the cabin door, the same security Robert had somehow bypassed on his way in. "We have 2 passengers who need to be removed," Amanda told the officers. Robert tried one last time to salvage the situation. "Look, everyone, this got out of hand. Can't we just forget about this and move on? I'll apologize. Victoria will apologize. We'll take our seats and everyone can get to New York on time." Cameron looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Robert, the time for apologies was 40 minutes ago. The time for taking assigned seats was when your wife first boarded this aircraft. The time for treating people with basic human dignity was always." As security officers approached, Victoria stood up unsteadily. "You've ruined our lives," she said to Cameron, her voice broken. "We've lost everything because of a seat." Cameron's response was quiet but carried clearly through the cabin. "You lost everything because of choices, Victoria. The choices you made about how to treat another human being. The seat was just the excuse." As airport security escorted Victoria and Robert Mitchell down the aisle toward the aircraft exit, their removal created a strange vacuum in the first-class cabin. Passengers who had been silent witnesses to the extraordinary confrontation began to process what they had actually seen unfold before their eyes. Danny Reeves, still live streaming to over 25,000 viewers, whispered into his phone, "Guys, I cannot believe what just happened. The woman who spent 40 minutes harassing this man, calling him a thug, trying to bribe him to move to coach, she just found out he owns the entire airline. And her husband got fired on the spot, for confronting his own company's biggest client. The aftermath of the Mitchells' departure felt almost anticlimactic after the intensity of the confrontation, but Cameron Brooks wasn't finished addressing the situation. He remained standing in the aisle looking around at the faces of passengers who had witnessed everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cameron said, his voice carrying easily through the cabin, "I want to apologize to all of you for the delay and disruption you've experienced this morning." Captain Torres stepped forward. "Sir, that's not necessary. You weren't the cause of—" Cameron held up a hand gently. "Captain, it is necessary. Everyone on this aircraft has been affected by what happened here, and they deserve an explanation." He looked around the cabin, making eye contact with passengers who were still recording, still processing, still trying to understand the full scope of what they had witnessed. "My name is Cameron Brooks, and I am the chairman and CEO of Skyline Airlines," he said clearly. "I was traveling to New York this morning for a board meeting, just like any other passenger. I deliberately choose to fly on our regular scheduled flights because I believe it's important for me to experience what our customers experience." Paul Santos, who had been recording the entire confrontation, found himself nodding in approval. As a frequent business traveler, he had often wondered if airline executives ever actually flew on their own planes. "What happened here today," Cameron continued, "should never happen to anyone anywhere, but especially not on an aircraft operated by my company. Every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, their background, or any assumptions others might make about them." Margaret Chen called out from her seat. "You handled yourself with remarkable grace, young man. That woman was completely out of line." "Thank you." "Mrs. Cameron paused. "Chen. Margaret Chen. This is my husband, Henry." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, but I want to be clear about something. What Victoria Mitchell did was wrong regardless of who I am. If I had been just another passenger, her behavior would have been equally inappropriate. The fact that I happen to own this airline doesn't make discrimination more or less acceptable." Jessica Martinez, who had been watching the exchange with growing admiration for how Cameron had handled the situation, stepped forward. "Sir, I want to apologize for not intervening more effectively. I should have shut down her discriminatory comments immediately." Cameron looked at her with something approaching warmth. "Jessica, you did everything you could within your authority. You confirmed seat assignments, you called for supervision when the situation escalated, and you maintained your professionalism throughout. You have nothing to apologize for." Amanda Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "Mr. Brooks, Jessica handled this exactly as we train our flight attendants to handle difficult passengers." "Which brings me to an important point," Cameron said, addressing the entire cabin again. "What you witnessed today wasn't just one person's bad behavior. It was a teaching moment about how we respond to discrimination when we see it." He gestured toward the passengers who had recorded the incident. "Several of you documented what happened here. You created a record that will ensure there are consequences for discriminatory behavior. That kind of accountability matters." Danny felt compelled to speak up. "Sir, I've been live streaming this whole thing. It's gone viral. Tens of thousands of people have watched it happen in real time." Cameron nodded. "Good. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. When discrimination happens in the shadows, it's easier to ignore or minimize. When it happens in public, witnessed and recorded, it becomes much harder to deny or dismiss." A businessman near the front of the cabin raised his hand slightly. "Mr. Brooks, what will happen to that couple now?" Cameron considered the question carefully. "They'll face the consequences of their actions. Victoria Mitchell is now banned from flying on Skyline Airlines. Robert Mitchell lost his job because he chose to confront a situation without understanding the facts. Those are the immediate consequences." But he continued, "The larger consequences are what matters more. Every person who witnessed this incident, everyone watching the live stream, everyone who sees the videos that will inevitably be posted online, they've seen what discrimination looks like in 2024. They've seen how it can escalate, and hopefully they've also seen that there are always choices about how to respond. Paul Santos lowered his phone and addressed Cameron directly. You could have identified yourself immediately and ended this whole thing in 30 seconds. Why didn't you? The question drew everyone's attention. Cameron was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking about his answer. Because the moment I revealed who I was, the focus would have shifted from her behavior to my position. Instead of examining why someone would treat another person that way, we'd be talking about the embarrassment of not recognizing the CEO. The discrimination would have been swept aside by the drama of the revelation. He paused, looking around the cabin again. Every day, people who don't have corporate titles or positions of power face exactly what I faced today. They don't get to pull out a CEO card and change the dynamic. They have to endure the discrimination, the assumptions, the casual cruelty. If I had ended this immediately, we wouldn't have seen the full scope of what that looks like. Henry Chen spoke up from his seat. Son, you turned this into an education for all of us. I hope so, Cameron replied, because understanding is the first step toward change. Captain Torres checked his watch. Sir, if we're ready, we can still make up some time en route to New York. Cameron nodded. Let's get everyone to their destinations. As passengers began settling back into their seats, preparing for the delayed departure, Cameron made one more announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, due to the delay you've experienced today, everyone on this flight will receive a full refund of their ticket price regardless of which cabin you're seated in. Additionally, you'll all receive vouchers for future travel that can be used for any destination in our network. The cabin erupted in applause and cheers. Danny grinned at his phone and told his live stream audience, and that's how you turn a terrible situation into something positive. This guy just gave everyone a free flight and travel vouchers. Cameron took his seat in 1A, the seat that had started the entire confrontation. As he buckled his seatbelt, he reflected on how a routine flight to New York had become something much more significant. As Flight 847 finally pushed back from the gate, 45 minutes behind schedule, the repercussions of the morning's incident were already rippling outward at the speed of social media. Danny's live stream had been captured and clipped by dozens of viewers with the most dramatic moments. Victoria's discriminatory comments, the money offer, Robert's confrontation, and the revelation of Cameron's identity, spreading across Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. The hashtags, #VictoriaEntitled and #CEOJustice, were trending nationwide. Cameron Brooks sat quietly in seat 1, reviewing emails that had started flooding in as news of the incident spread. His head of communications had already sent 3 messages, each more urgent than the last. His general counsel had called twice. The board chair had texted asking if he needed any support, but Cameron wasn't focused on damage control or corporate communications. He was thinking about the broader implications of what had happened and what it meant for the thousands of Skyline Airlines employees who would hear about this incident within hours. Jessica Martinez approached his seat as the aircraft reached cruising altitude. Mr. Brooks, can I get you anything? Coffee, water? Actually, Jessica, I'd like to ask you something, Cameron said, gesturing for her to lean closer so their conversation would be private. In your 7 years with Skyline, have you seen situations like this before? Jessica hesitated, then nodded. Not exactly like this, but similar dynamics. Passengers who make assumptions about other passengers based on appearance. Comments about who belongs in first class. It's more common than most people realize. And how do those situations usually get resolved? Honestly. Jessica looked around to make sure no other passengers were listening. Usually the person being discriminated against just accepts it. They don't want to make a scene, so they move seats or endure the comments. It's easier than fighting. Cameron nodded thoughtfully. What's different about today? Jessica smiled slightly. Today, the person being discriminated against had the power to do something about it. Most passengers don't have that luxury. Exactly. Cameron said. "Which is why this incident matters beyond just what happened to me personally." Meanwhile, in the business class cabin, Paul Santos was editing the video footage he had captured, preparing to post it to his company's social media accounts. As a Hispanic businessman who had experienced his own share of discrimination over the years, he recognized the importance of documenting and sharing what had occurred. Margaret and Henry Chen were discussing the incident with fellow passengers, marveling at Cameron's composure throughout the confrontation. "That young man," Margaret told a nearby passenger, "he showed more dignity and self-control than I've ever seen. He could have humiliated those people from the beginning, but he let them reveal their true character instead." Back on the ground in Los Angeles, the consequences for Victoria and Robert Mitchell were mounting rapidly. Airport security had detained them for questioning about Robert's unauthorized boarding of the aircraft. Victoria's Diamond Elite status with Skyline had been permanently revoked, and she had been placed on the airline's no-fly list. Robert's termination from Aero Supply Corporation was being processed in real time. His corporate credit cards had already been canceled, his building access revoked, and his company car would be repossessed by the end of the day. 20 years of career advancement had been wiped out in a single morning. But the most devastating consequence was still unfolding online. Victoria's discriminatory comments, captured in high-definition video and broadcast live to thousands of viewers, were being shared and reshared across social media platforms. Her face was becoming synonymous with entitled racism, her behavior a cautionary tale about the dangers of assumptions and prejudice. The couple's personal information began appearing online within hours. Their home address, Robert's LinkedIn profile, Victoria's social media accounts, all were being shared and scrutinized by an increasingly outraged internet mob. The viral nature of the incident meant there would be no escaping the consequences of their actions. At 30,000 feet, Cameron Brooks was thinking about the systematic changes this incident would necessitate. He pulled out his laptop and began drafting an email to his senior leadership team. "Colleagues," he wrote, "by now you've likely heard about the incident on Flight 847 this morning. I want to address several immediate actions we need to take." He outlined plans for enhanced discrimination training for all customer-facing employees, clearer protocols for handling bias incidents, and a review of policies to ensure passengers facing discrimination had better recourse and support. "This incident," he continued in the email, "highlights gaps in our training and procedures that we must address immediately. Every passenger deserves to feel safe and respected on our aircraft, regardless of their appearance, background, or any assumptions others might make about them." Danny Reeves, still occasionally addressing his phone, though his live stream had ended, was processing his own role in the morning's events. As a college student studying journalism, he understood the power of social media to expose injustice, but he was also grappling with the responsibility that came with that power. The video he had captured would likely follow Victoria and Robert Mitchell for years, possibly decades. Their children, their extended family, their future employers, all would potentially see the footage of their discriminatory behavior. The internet had a long memory, and viral incidents like this one tended to define people permanently. As Flight 847 began its descent into New York, Cameron received a text message from Frank Sullivan at Aero Supply Corporation. "Cameron, I cannot adequately express my regret about Robert's behavior today. Our company's relationship with you is built on mutual respect and professionalism, and Robert's actions violated both. We're conducting a full review to ensure nothing like this can happen again." Cameron typed back, "Frank, I appreciate your swift action. Robert's behavior reflects on him, not on Aero Supply. Our business relationship remains strong." The exchange exemplified Cameron's approach throughout the entire incident, holding individuals accountable for their actions while avoiding broader condemnation that could harm innocent people. 3 months after the incident on Flight 847, The changes at Skyline Airlines were both visible and profound. Cameron Brooks stood in the company's training facility in Denver, watching a group of new flight attendants practice scenarios designed to help them recognize and respond to discrimination. The training had been completely overhauled following the Victoria Mitchell incident. Every customer-facing employee now went through expanded bias training, learning to identify discriminatory behavior early and intervene effectively. The scenarios were based on real incidents, including detailed case studies of what had happened on Flight 847. The key instructor, Maria Santos, was telling the trainees is not to wait until the situation escalates. If you hear a passenger making assumptions about another passenger based on appearance, address it immediately. You don't need to wait for explicit slurs or obvious discrimination. Cameron watched from the back of the room as the new flight attendants practiced the techniques. One scenario involved a passenger questioning another passenger's right to be in first class. The trainee flight attendant calmly but firmly explained that all passengers deserved equal respect and that seating assignments were based on ticketing, not personal opinions. "Much better," Maria said as the role play concluded. "Remember, your authority comes from company policy and federal regulations. You're not debating or negotiating. You're enforcing standards." After the training session, Cameron met with Maria to review the program's effectiveness. "How are the employees responding to the new protocols?" he asked. "Very positively," Maria replied. Initially, some were concerned about confronting passengers who might be Diamond Elite members or corporate accounts. But after the Mitchell incident, they understand that no passenger's status gives them the right to discriminate against others. The changes went beyond training. Skyline had implemented a new reporting structure that allowed passengers to document discrimination incidents directly with corporate headquarters, bypassing local management that might be reluctant to address complaints against high-value customers. Every incident was investigated by an independent team, and the results were reported directly to Cameron's office. The airline had also partnered with civil rights organizations to conduct regular audits of their customer service practices, looking for patterns of bias or discrimination that might not be immediately obvious to internal reviewers. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The viral video of Victoria Mitchell's behavior had become a teaching tool throughout the airline industry. Other carriers had reached out to Skyline to learn about their response protocols, and the incident had sparked industry-wide conversations about dignity, respect, and accountability. Cameron often reflected on how a routine flight had become a catalyst for meaningful change. The attention generated by the incident had been uncomfortable at times. He preferred operating behind the scenes rather than being in the public spotlight. But he recognized that the visibility had been necessary to drive real transformation. The consequences for Victoria and Robert Mitchell had been severe and lasting. Victoria's behavior on the plane had made her unemployable in her consulting field, where reputation and client relationships were paramount. The viral video followed her everywhere, a permanent reminder of a 40-minute period that had defined her public identity. Robert's termination from Aero Supply had effectively ended his career in the aviation fuel industry. The corporate world was small, and his confrontation with Skyline's CEO had become legendary as a cautionary tale about the dangers of acting without complete information. Their marriage had survived barely, but the stress of public humiliation, financial uncertainty, and social isolation had taken its toll. They had relocated to a different state, hoping to escape the notoriety. But the Internet's memory was long and unforgiving. Cameron felt no satisfaction in their downfall. Their consequences were self-inflicted, the result of choices they had made about how to treat another human being. But he took no pleasure in their suffering. Instead, he focused on the positive changes their behavior had inadvertently sparked. Hundreds of employees were now better equipped to recognize and address discrimination. Thousands of passengers were traveling in an environment with stronger protections against bias. And millions of people who had seen the viral video had been reminded that dignity and respect were not negotiable regardless of someone's apparent position or status. The incident had also changed how Cameron traveled. While he still flew on Skyline's scheduled flights to stay connected with the passenger experience, he was now recognized by most employees and frequent flyers. The anonymity that had allowed him to observe unfiltered customer service interactions was gone, but that recognition had its own benefits. Flight attendants and gate agents knew they might encounter their CEO on any flight, which served as a constant reminder that passenger service wasn't abstract company policy. It was personal accountability to leadership. On a sunny afternoon in December, Cameron boarded Skyline Flight 392 from Denver to Atlanta. He was assigned to seat 3A in first class, and as he settled in for the 2-hour flight, he noticed a young woman in seat 1A who looked nervous and uncomfortable. She was well-dressed, but clearly inexperienced with first-class travel, fumbling with the seat controls and looking around uncertainly at the cabin service. Cameron recognized the signs of someone flying first class for the first time, possibly upgraded, or traveling on someone else's ticket. A businessman in seat 2C was watching the woman with obvious irritation, making quiet comments to his traveling companion about passengers who didn't know how to behave in first class. Cameron felt a familiar tension begin to build in his chest. The comments weren't explicitly discriminatory, but they carried the same undertones of judgment and assumption that had characterized Victoria Mitchell's behavior. Before the situation could escalate, Cameron leaned across the aisle toward the young woman. "First time in first class?" he asked quietly. She nodded, looking embarrassed. "It shows, doesn't it?" "Not at all," Cameron replied. "But if you need help with anything, the seat controls the service, whatever. Don't hesitate to ask the flight attendants. That's what they're here for." The businessman's comments stopped immediately. The young woman smiled gratefully and relaxed visibly. A potential conflict had been diffused through simple human kindness. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Cameron reflected on how much had changed since that morning in Los Angeles. Not just in company policies or training programs, but in awareness and accountability. People were thinking more carefully about their assumptions, speaking up more quickly when they witnessed bias, and treating fellow travelers with greater consideration. The incident with Victoria Mitchell had been unpleasant and disruptive, but it had also been transformative. It had reminded everyone involved, passengers, employees, and viewers around the world, that dignity was not a luxury good available only to those who could afford first-class tickets. It was a basic human right that cost nothing to give and everything to withhold. Cameron closed his eyes as Flight 392 climbed into the afternoon sky, carrying its passengers toward their destinations with a little more respect, a little more understanding, and a lot more accountability than had existed 3 months earlier. Sometimes the most important changes came from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the most powerful lessons emerged from the moments when people revealed who they truly were when they thought no one important was watching. The truth was everyone was always watching, and everyone was always important. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that quiet dignity can change everything, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice, courage, and the power of treating every person with respect, because the next story we tell might be yours.